Masaru Takeda had always been famous in the world of martial arts. He wasn't just a karate expert, he was a legend in Japan and known internationally. His black belt was not just a symbol of skill, but of years of discipline, victories, and stories told across dojos around the world. At 45, he had trained more than 2,000 students, won many championships, and traveled to more than 30 countries. He had sharp eyes, a quiet but proud smile, and a posture that made people turn to look even when he walked silently into a room. People respected him not only for his talent, but for his serious dedication to karate. But Masaru had one weakness, his pride. Over time, he had started to believe he was unbeatable. He thought of himself not only as a master, but as the best. Whenever he entered a new country, he often tried to test the limits of others around him, see if anyone could match his skill or focus. He believed that his strength was unmatched, and no one could shake him. Some found this confidence impressive. Others thought it was arrogance. Masaru didn't care. He believed that until someone proved him wrong. He had the right to think. He was on top. This time, Masaru arrived in London. He had been invited to a famous martial arts expo, where top fighters from across the world were going to perform and give training sessions. It was a huge event, and many young fighters in Europe were excited to see Masaru in action. Cameras followed him from the moment he stepped out of the airport. Local news channels interviewed him about his expectations for the event. Masaru gave short answers, always with that quiet confidence. "I am ready," he said, and London is ready to learn. The night before the event, Masaru decided to walk through the streets of London. He wanted to see the city, feel its energy, and maybe meet some local people. He wasn't someone who liked loud places, so he avoided bars or restaurants. Instead, he wandered near historical buildings, admiring the old architecture and the calm beauty of London's streets. Soon, he reached Buckingham Palace. Even at night, there were tourists around, taking photos, laughing, whispering stories. But what caught Masaru's attention wasn't the palace itself. It was the royal guards, dressed in red coats, black boots, and tall bearskin hats. They stood completely still outside the palace gates. They didn't move, blink, or show any reaction to the people around them. Children waved in their faces. Some tourists made jokes, but the guards just stood there, frozen like statues. Masaru stared at one of them for a long time. The man was tall, built like a soldier, with a strong jaw and wide shoulders. Yet, he didn't react at all. Masaru was surprised. Back in Japan, even the most focused monks would shift their eyes or adjust their breath if someone got too close. But this man was like a rock. Masaru looked closer. Still nothing. Not a blink. A young British man standing nearby noticed Masaru's interest. He smiled and said, "They're trained not to react. No matter what happens, they stay still unless there's a real threat." Masaru raised an eyebrow. "Even if someone tries to scare them." The man chuckled. "Oh, many people try. But it never works. That's why they're called the Queensor now, the King's Guards. They're famous for their discipline." Masaru nodded slowly, but inside a small fire had started to burn. He didn't like the idea that someone else could be more focused than him. It's not just someone, an entire unit of people who were trained to ignore all distractions. The idea of someone being able to ignore a master like him felt like a challenge. He didn't say anything out loud, but the thought stayed in his head all night. Back in his hotel room, Masaru couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those guards, their stillness, their control, their silence. It was powerful. But was it real focus, or just something they were pretending to show? Could they hold that same control in the face of real danger? What if someone showed them a real threat, a tourist joke, but something faster, sharper, something with the spirit of martial arts? Masaru knew how to move with speed that most people couldn't see. His kicks could pass inches from a person's face without touching them. He had done it before. He wondered if he did that to a royal guard, would they flinch? Move? React? Small smile formed on his face. Maybe he had just found a new challenge. The next morning, Masaru called his assistant. He asked him to bring the video camera. "We're going to film something before the event," he said. "Something the world has never seen." His assistant was used to Masaru's strange ideas. "Where to, sensei?" he asked. "Buckingham Palace," Masaru replied. "There is something I want to test." By noon, Masaru stood once again in front of the palace gates, this time wearing a casual white tracksuit, his black belt tied proudly around his waist. His assistant had the camera ready, and several tourists noticed them immediately. Some recognized Masaru from YouTube. "Ah! We're just curious." A small crowd began to gather. Masaru chose his guard carefully. This one looked strong, maybe even stronger than the one from last night. His face was half hidden under the tall hat, but his stance was solid. Masaru walked up slowly, hands behind his back, as if simply observing. The guard didn't look at him. Masaru stepped a little closer. He bowed, a respectful gesture, though the guard didn't return it. Masaru took a deep breath and moved into a fighting stance. People started recording with their phones. The air became tense. Everyone could feel something unusual was about to happen. In a flash, Masaru performed a lightning-fast kata sequence of powerful karate moves. His arms cut through the air like blades. His legs moved like coiled springs. The movements were sharp, full of energy, but always controlled. He ended the sequence with a high-speed kick that stopped just 2 inches from the guard's chest. The crowd gasped. The guard didn't move. Masaru stepped back, impressed. He tried again. This time, he spun and delivered a kick that stopped right near the guard's shoulder. Still, no reaction. He circled the guard slowly. Then he raised his leg and performed a kick that stopped right next to the guard's face, his foot so close it could have brushed the tip of the man's nose. Still, the guard did not flinch, not even a blink. The crowd began to cheer and laugh. Some clapped. Others whispered, "He's amazing." Or, "How's the guard staying so calm?" Masaru turned to the camera and smiled. "See this?" he said. "In Japanese, even steel can have cracks. Let's find them." He stepped even closer now, his foot brushing the edge of the guard's black boots. This time he didn't kick. He simply stood in the guard's path. He knew from local stories that if you blocked a guard's way, they had permission to react. Masaru waited. The crowd grew quiet, and then something unexpected happened. The guard moved, but he didn't shout, didn't threaten. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward with military precision, used his rifle in a defensive move, and guided Masaru aside with a technique that looked more like judo than military training. Masaru, caught off guard, stumbled slightly but kept his balance. His eyes widened. The guard returned to position just as quickly, his face calm, his posture perfect. He still said nothing. The tourists exploded in applause. Some cheered for Masaru, others for the guard. But Masaru stood still, breathing heavier now, not from tiredness, but from surprise. He had come to test the focus of a royal guard, but in that moment, he realized he may have underestimated them. Deeply, as his assistant turned off the camera, Masaru stared at the guard one last time. No. Words were exchanged. But something had shifted inside him. He came to London believing he was the master of focus, the king of control. But now he had seen another kind of mastery. A different kind of power, silent, strong, and deeply rooted. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, London woke up to something unexpected. Videos from the day before were spreading like wildfire on social media. Everywhere from YouTube to Instagram, Facebook to Twitter, people were sharing a short clip of a Japanese karate master standing toe-to-toe with a British royal guard. The video showed Masaru Takeda doing his fast and sharp karate moves right in front of the guard's face. The most dramatic moment was when he kicked near the guard's head, only stopping inches away. But what made the video special wasn't just the skill of Masaru. It was the calm of the guard. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. And then, when Masaru blocked his path, the guard responded swiftly and smoothly, moving the karate master aside with a clean and controlled move. It was like watching two professionals from different worlds meet without words. People were amazed. Some laughed. Some debated, did Masaru go too far? Was the guard trained in martial arts? Was this real or planned? These questions flooded the comment sections. And Masaru, sitting in his hotel room, was watching it all. He didn't expect this kind of attention. It only wanted to test the guard's discipline. Maybe he also wanted to show that even someone as skilled as a royal guard could be shaken by the presence of a real martial artist. Now the internet was treating it like a showdown, and many were saying the guard had won Masaru. He didn't like that. He had faced real fighters in the ring. Champions, masters, none of them had ignored him like that guard did. None had pushed him aside without a word. It felt personal, not because he was hurt, but because he felt invisible. And to someone like Masaru, that was harder to take than any punch. His assistant Riku came into the room with breakfast, but Masaru barely touched the food. His eyes were still on the screen. Sensei Riku said carefully, "You're trending everywhere. Even Japanese news is talking about it." Masaru didn't answer. "They're calling it the kick and the calm. Some say it's a great example of Eastern and Western discipline meeting." Masaru finally looked up. "They think it was even?" "Well," Riku hesitated. "Some think the guard was more impressive." Masaru stood up, walked to the window, and stared outside. He hated feeling defeated. But more than that, he hated not understanding. There was something about the guard's stillness. Something deep. Something powerful. It wasn't just training. It was something else. Something Masaru hadn't learned yet. Later that day, Masaru was scheduled to appear at a press event for the Martial Arts Expo. When he arrived, dozens of reporters asked questions not about his karate, but about the palace incident. "Master Tokeda, was it planned? Do you regret the stunt? Was the guard trained in martial arts? Are you going to challenge him again?" Masaru answered calmly, but inside, he was burning. "I don't regret it," he said. "It was a test of discipline, and I am still learning from it." After the event, he decided to return to Buckingham Palace. Not to challenge again, but to observe. This time, he wore normal clothes. Camera. No belt. Just Masaru, quietly walking among the crowd. He found the same guard from before. The man was back in position, standing tall and silent. Masaru watched him for nearly an hour. Nothing. No twitch, no sigh. Just perfect stillness. But Masaru noticed something others didn't. It was in the guard's eyes. Calm, yes. Focused, yes. But also aware. The man was watching everything around him without moving a muscle. That was the part that amazed Masaru most. This wasn't a man pretending to be strong. This was a man who had become strength itself. There was no ego, no pride. Just duty, discipline, and silence. That night, Masaru couldn't sleep again. He kept thinking about the guard, about how he moved, about how he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. That was real power. But Masaru's pride still pushed. He wanted to understand more. So the next day, he asked Riku to dig deeper. "Find out who he is," Masaru said. "I want to know what kind of training they do." Riku did his best, but the guards were not public figures. Their names weren't listed. But he did find something useful. There was a small museum not far from the palace that had a section on the history and training of the royal guards. Masaru decided to visit at the museum. Masaru saw old photos, videos, and training routines. The royal guards were not just ceremonial figures. They were real soldiers. Many had combat experience. They trained in extreme weather, carried heavy rifles for hours, and had to remain completely still, no matter what happened around them. Masaru learned that their silence wasn't weakness. It was power, kind of mental control very few people in the world could master. But then he saw something that truly surprised him in one display. There was a training manual that included hand-to-hand combat techniques. Some of the moves were familiar. They were not karate, but they showed a similar control of balance, power, and reaction. One move in particular caught his eye. It was exactly what the guard had used on him. Subtle pressure redirection that guided the opponent without using violence. Masaru stared at the move for a long time. It wasn't just military. It was philosophical. It used the opponent's energy against them, not in a brutal way, but in a calm and clean way. It reminded him of something he had learned in his early days of training but had forgotten. True. Power does not shout. It does not show off. It only acts when needed, and never more than required. Masaru sat in the museum's quiet corner for a long time. He realized that the guard had taught him something no opponent ever had. And not through words or speeches, but through silence. When Masaru stepped outside, it had started to rain. The London streets looked gray and cold, but inside Masaru felt something warm, something changing. The next day, the Martial Arts Expo began. The hall was filled with fighters, fans, journalists, and martial arts lovers from all around the world. Masaru was the star of the event. Everyone was eager to see what he would do, but Masaru surprised them all. Instead of beginning with flashy moves, he started with a speech. He stood on the stage and said, "This week, I met a teacher. Not in a dojo, not in a ring, but on the street." The crowd fell silent. He didn't speak, didn't move. But he showed me something I'd forgotten. That true discipline is not loud. It does not challenge. It only stands firm when needed. People were moved. Some clapped softly. Some nodded in respect. Masaru bowed deeply and said, "Before I perform, I want to say thank you to the silent warrior who reminded me what martial arts is really about." Then he performed his katana to impress, to honor. And it was the most graceful performance of his life. But even then, something inside him still wanted to return. Not to challenge again, but to meet the guard, if possible. To look him in the eye and say, "Thank you," face to face. But would that ever happen? Masaru didn't know yet. But one thing was certain. The challenge that had begun as a test of pride, it turned into a lesson of the soul. The next morning, the sky over London was clear, but Masaru Takeda's mind was full of heavy thoughts. The images from the day he challenged the royal guard kept playing in his head like a film on repeat. He could still feel the moment when the guard moved fast, clean, and silent, and shifted him aside like a leaf in the wind. The movement was not filled with anger or force. It was smooth, powerful, and full of control. It had not embarrassed Masaru physically, but it had shaken something deep inside him. Something he hadn't expected. Masaru had always believed in focus, control, and calmness. These were the heart of martial arts. But now, after standing in front of that motionless soldier and feeling his presence, Masaru realized he had met someone who lived those values even more deeply than he did. The strange thing was, this man wasn't a karate master or any famous martial artist. He was a guard, a soldier, someone who wasn't supposed to fight unless absolutely necessary. And yet, in those few seconds, he had shown more discipline than many fighters Masaru had met in his entire life. The video of the challenge had now gone beyond the martial arts world. News channels were talking about it. Online influencers were analyzing every second of the footage. Some praised Masaru for his skill. Others criticized him for disrespecting a national figure. There was one thing they all agreed on, though. Guard's reaction was extraordinary. Masaru wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had been in the spotlight before, but this felt different. He had become part of a story that was no longer about karate. It was about honor, culture, and respect. And he wasn't sure if people saw him as the hero or the fool. He decided to walk again. The streets of London were busy, but Masaru found quiet corners. He liked walking in silence, thinking. He passed small cafes, bookshops, and flower stalls. Every now and then, someone recognized him and asked for a photo. He smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He was still thinking about the guard. Masaru wanted to see him again, not to challenge, not to fight, but to understand. He returned to Buckingham Palace. The place was full of tourists as always. And yes, there he was, the same guard. Standing. In the exact same place, completely still, just like before. Masaru watched him quietly from a distance. He didn't try to get close this time. He didn't want to disturb. He simply stood and watched. He noticed details he hadn't seen before. The way the guard's boots were perfectly polished. The way his posture was strong but relaxed. The way his eyes looked forward without moving but somehow still seemed aware of everything. Masaru studied his breath, his balance, his silence. Reminded him of monks he had met in Japan, people who had trained for years to quiet their minds. Then something surprising happened. The guard shifted slightly, almost unnoticeably, and another guard came to replace him. It was the changing of the guard, something that happened every few hours. Masaru watched carefully. The new guard took position with the same calmness. Masaru knew this wasn't the same man. The energy was different. It was clear to him now, the guard from the challenge had something special, something rare. Masaru turned to walk away. But just then, a man in a black coat approached him quietly. He looked like he worked for the military clean haircut firm, posture, and serious eyes. He spoke softly. "Mr. Takeda," the man said, "I believe you're looking for someone." Masaru was surprised but nodded. Double quotes. "The guard you encountered?" "His name is Thomas Harrington. He has served for 10 years. Highly respected. Would you like to speak with him?" Masaru's heart jumped. He nodded again. The man smiled slightly. "Follow me." Masaru was taken through a back entrance of the palace area, a place no tourists were allowed. He walked through quiet halls, passed by soldiers in uniform, and finally was led into a simple room. It had a table, 2 chairs, and nothing more. The man in the coat nodded politely and left Masaru alone. A few minutes later, the door opened. Thomas Harrington walked in, not wearing the red uniform now, but a simple, dark blue military outfit. Without the tall bearskin hat, Masaru could see his face clearly for the first time. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp features, calm eyes, and a face that showed both strength and kindness. Thomas nodded respectfully. "Mr. Takeda." Masaru stood and bowed deeply. "Thank you for seeing me." They sat down. For a moment there was silence. Not uncomfortable, just peaceful. Masaru spoke first. That I had mastered silence and control. But when I stood in front of you, I felt something I had never felt before. Thomas smiled gently. "What was that?" "I felt invisible. Not because you ignored me, but because you didn't need to react. You didn't need to prove anything." Thomas leaned back slightly. "We are trained to be still, to observe, to act only when it is truly necessary." Masaru nodded. "That is exactly what I try to teach my students. I realize now I have not lived it as deeply as you." Thomas didn't boast. He didn't smile with pride. He simply said, "Stillness is harder than action, but it's also more powerful." Masaru was quiet for a moment, letting those words settle. Then he asked, "The movement you used on me was not military training, was it?" Thomas looked at him and replied, "Partly military, but also jujitsu. I trained for a few years, not much, but enough to learn how to redirect energy instead of resisting it." Masaru's eyes widened. "That's what I felt. You didn't push me. You guided me, like water flowing around a rock." Thomas smiled. "You notice well?" Masaru looked down at his hands, then back at Thomas. "May I ask you something unusual?" Thomas nodded. "Would you spar with me, not as a challenge, just as a way to learn?" Thomas thought for a moment. Then he said, "If you are asking with respect, then yes." Later that afternoon, the 2 men stood in a private training room inside the palace grounds. No cameras, no audience. Just Masaru, Takeda, and Thomas Harrington, barefoot on a mat. They bowed to each other. What followed was not a fight. It was more like a conversation without words. Masaru moved with speed and skill, his strikes sharp and clean. Thomas responded with smooth counters, using balance and timing rather than force. Every move was met with calm. Every attack turned into a dance. Masaru felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not competition, not pressure, but learning. He was being challenged in a way that made him grow. After several rounds, they stopped, both breathing lightly. Not tired, but thoughtful. Masaru bowed deeply again. You are not just a guard, you are a warrior. Thomas returned the bow. And you are not just a fighter, you are a student. That is even greater. They shook hands. As Masaru left the palace grounds that day, he felt different. Not because he had won or lost, but because he had discovered a new level of his own journey. He came to challenge a guard. Instead, he met a mirror that showed him who he was and who he could still become. The city lights of London flickered around him as he walked. The sound of cars, people, and distant bells filled the air. But in his mind there was only silence, not empty silence. Peaceful silence. The kind of silence only true discipline can bring. Masaru Takeda returned to his hotel that evening with a strange feeling in his heart. He had just finished a silent sparring session with Royal Guard Thomas Harrington, the same man he had once tried to challenge in front of hundreds of people. That moment, when they bowed to each other after the match, stayed with Masaru like a powerful memory. He had faced many fighters in his life, but none had taught him a lesson through stillness and silence. No shouting, no showing off, no drama just. Calm energy and deep understanding. But the world outside didn't know about this private meeting. What people saw and remembered was still the video from a few days ago. The video that had gone viral. It's the one where Masaru looked like a show-off, who had tried to embarrass a guard and ended up looking foolish. The online world didn't understand the full story. It didn't know about the lesson he had learned or the respect he had developed for Thomas. The internet only loved quick moments and viral reactions. Masaru opened his phone and checked the news. There were thousands of comments. Some supported him and praised his skill, but many were negative. Some people from Britain were angry that he had tried to mock a royal guard. Others said he had no respect for another country's traditions. Martial artists from around the world also had mixed reactions. Some called him brave. Others said he had acted with arrogance. Every time he refreshed the page, more people were talking. Videos, articles, tweets, jokes, even memes. Masaru's name was everywhere, and not always in a good way. He put his phone down and sat quietly in the hotel room. He thought deeply about what had happened. At first, he had come to London full of pride. He thought he could show something new, something exciting. But now, he saw that what he had done had hurt people, not physically, but emotionally. I'd not respected their traditions the way he should have. That realization cut deeper than any insult online. His assistant Riku knocked and entered the room. Riku looked tired and nervous. He'd been reading the comments too. Sensei, Riku said softly, people are asking for a response. Journalists, fans, everyone. They want to know what you think now. Masaru didn't answer right away. Then he said, they don't need a response from a fighter. They need one from a student. That night, Masaru sat at his desk, took out his notebook, and began writing. He didn't want to make a flashy video or give a big press speech. He wanted to speak from the heart. Slowly and carefully, he wrote a message to the world. He wrote about what happened in front of the palace, how he had tested the guard, how Thomas had responded not with anger, but with perfect discipline. He explained how that moment had changed something inside him. He wrote about his private meeting with Thomas, their silent match, the respect he now had for the training of the royal guards. Most importantly, he admitted that he had acted with pride, and for that, he was sorry. His words were honest, simple, no excuses. The next day, he posted the message online. At first, it didn't get much attention, but slowly people started to read it. Some were surprised by his humility. Others shared it and praised him for being open about his mistakes. Even people who had once criticized him began to say, at least he learned. In just a few hours, Masaru's message began spreading. Across social media, martial artists from around the world shared it with respect. He said, this is what a true master does. He listens. He learns. A famous judo champion from France wrote, Masaru Takeda has reminded us all that the journey of a martial artist never ends. A British veteran commented, he came to test us. Now he respects us. That takes strength. Masaru was not trying to fix his reputation. He only wanted to do what felt right in his heart. But slowly people started to see the real picture. He saw that the story was not about a fight, it was about a lesson. Despite the support, Masaru still faced consequences. The Martial Arts Expo removed him from the main event. His sponsors backed away quietly, saying they wanted to avoid controversy. Some dojo owners who had once invited him for workshops canceled their offers. Masaru didn't fight back. He accepted everything with calm. He understood now that honor was not something you carried in your belt. It was something you lived in your actions. In the days that followed, Masaru stayed in London, but away from the spotlight. He visited museums, quiet gardens, and small tea shops. He read books on British history, military traditions, and philosophy. He spent time reflecting on his own past, his training in the mountains of Japan, his first karate master, and the times he had lost matches and learned the most. These memories reminded him why he started karate in the first place. Not for fame, not for applause, but for growth. One evening, while sitting in a park, Masaru heard footsteps behind him. It was Thomas. Masaru stood up, surprised but happy. "I heard about your message," Thomas said. "Thank you," Masaru bowed. "It was my honor." They walked together along the garden path. This time, there were no cameras. No audience, just two men who had shared an unexpected moment that changed both of them. "I've also learned something," Thomas said. "I realized that people like U.S. soldiers, martial artists, we don't just carry skills. We carry responsibility. What we do teaches others how to act." Masaru nodded. "Yes, and sometimes we forget that." They sat on a bench under a tree watching the sunset. Thomas asked, "What will you do now?" Masaru thought for a while. Then he said, "I will go home. I will teach again. But I will teach differently. Not just moves and strikes, but how to listen, how to wait, how to respect." Thomas smiled. "That sounds like a good path." Before they parted ways, Masaru gave Thomas a small gift, a folded piece of cloth. It was an old headband Masaru had worn during his first international tournament many years ago. It had the Japanese symbol for growth on it. "This is not a thank you," Masaru said. "It's a reminder that we always have more to learn." Thomas accepted it with quiet respect. When Masaru boarded his flight back to Japan a few days later, he felt lighter. Not because the world had forgiven him, but because he had forgiven himself. He knew now that mistakes, when faced with honesty, could become the strongest part of your story. Back in Japan, Masaru returned to his dojo. The students gathered around, curious and eager to hear about London. Masaru didn't talk about the fight. Instead, he talked about silence, about standing still, about meeting a man who taught him that true strength sometimes comes without words or violence. His students listened quietly. And when he was finished, they all bowed not just to a master, but to a man who had shown them what real learning. It looks like in the corner of the dojo, Masaru placed a new calligraphy scroll. It had a single word painted on it, written with deep black ink: stillness. From that day on, it became the heart of his teaching. Masaru Takeda was finally home. The plane had landed in Tokyo, and he walked through the airport alone, without any cameras or fans following him this time. It was a quiet return, far from the excitement that had filled the days before his trip to London. But this quiet felt right. It felt peaceful. He didn't want noise or attention. He wanted time to think, to teach, and to live with more understanding than before. The ride from the airport to his village was long. He looked out the window and saw the cherry trees slowly blooming. The sky was soft gray, and the mountains, in the distance, were calm and unmoving, like ancient guardians. They reminded him of something of Thomas Harrington, the royal guard who had shown him what stillness truly meant. That man had stood like a mountain, unshaken by Masaru's presence, unmoved by the noise of the world around him. Masaru smiled quietly to himself, felt lucky to have met someone like that. Back at the dojo, the students welcomed him warmly. They had heard pieces of the story, some from social media, some from news, and some from the message Masaru had posted online. But none of them truly knew how deeply this journey had changed their master. They could only see that he looked different now. Not in appearance, but in spirit. His eyes were softer. His voice was calmer, and his movements, though still powerful, were more thoughtful, more meaningful. Masaru gathered them all in the main hall. They sat in silence, waiting. He looked. At each of their faces, some young, some older, some new, some who had been with him for years. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I went to London as a karate master," he said, "but I came back as a student." There was surprise in the student's eyes. Masaru was always a humble man, but these words felt heavier. They listened even more closely. He told them about the Royal Guard, about the way he stood, the way he didn't react, the way he moved only when it was necessary, and even then moved with care, with balance, with control. He described the quiet sparring match, the handshake, the respect, and the silence that followed. He shared the deep feeling of being reminded that real strength didn't always need to prove itself. He stood up, slowly and firmly, and performed a simple kata. Not a flashy one, not full of spinning kicks or jumping strikes. Just a clean, precise series of movements, each done with full presence, full respect. The room was silent. Students watched, not blinking, their hearts calm and their minds open. When Masaru finished, he bowed. "This is what we will practice now," he said. "Not just how to fight, but how to wait. Not just how to strike, but how to stay still. Not just how to win, but how to walk away with peace." From that day, the dojo changed. They still trained hard. They still learned self-defense, power, and speed. But now, every lesson also included silence, reflection, a moment to sit and breathe. Masaru added new rules to their daily practice: no speaking during warm-up, 10 minutes of meditation before class, and one question that each student had to answer at the end of every session: "What did you learn about yourself today?" The change wasn't easy for everyone. Some of the younger students, especially those who loved fast action, didn't understand it at first. But slowly, they began to feel something deeper growing inside them. Their minds became quieter. Their movements became sharper. They began to respect not just the fight, but the calm before and after it. Months passed. Masaru continued teaching, but he also continued writing. He wrote letters to martial artists around the world, sharing his story and what he had learned. Some didn't reply, but many did. Messages came from Brazil, where a jiu-jitsu master wrote that Masaru's experience reminded him of his first tournament loss. A teacher in South Korea said he read Masaru's message to his students. Even in London, Thomas Harrington wrote a simple but powerful note. "You stood still, I noticed." One day, Masaru was invited to speak at a global martial arts conference in Osaka. At first, he didn't want to go. He didn't want the spotlight. But his students gently pushed him. "You must go," they said. "Not to impress, but to inspire." Masaru agreed. At the event, hundreds of masters, teachers, and fighters from all over the world gathered. Names, famous faces, and crowds filled the halls. When Masaru stepped onto the stage, many expected him to show his legendary skills again. But he surprised everyone. He walked to the center, bowed, and simply sat down. He closed his eyes. The hall went quiet. People didn't understand at first. But then, one by one, they began to sit. They followed his lead. For 5 full minutes, no one moved. No one spoke. It was a room full of warriors. Completely still. After the silence, Masaru stood up and spoke just one sentence. "In stillness, I met my greatest teacher." He bowed again, and the crowd stood in respect. Later, during a quiet moment backstage, a young fighter approached Masaru. He was nervous, holding a small notebook. "Master Takeda," he said, "I'm just beginning. I'm not very strong. Sometimes I feel angry when I lose. I feel like I'm nothing. What should I do?" Masaru smiled gently and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Sit still," he said. "Let the anger pass like a wave. Then, ask yourself what the loss taught you. Every time you fall, the floor is teaching you how to stand again." The young man nodded, eyes wide. Masaru looked at him and added, "You don't have to be loud. To be powerful, you don't have to win every fight. Just stay true, stay quiet, and keep learning. After the conference, Masaru visited a small shrine in Kyoto, where his first karate master used to meditate. He sat alone, just as he had done. As a young boy, before he ever knew about fame or belts or competitions, the wind whispered through the trees. The stones were cold beneath his feet, and in the silence, Masaru felt whole again. He took out a small piece of paper and wrote a single sentence in calligraphy. "The man who stands still hears the world move." He left it on the shrine, bowed, and walked away. Years later, the phrase would be printed in martial arts schools across many countries. As time passed, Masaru continued to teach, to write, and to grow. He didn't seek more trophies. He didn't chase titles. He lived a quiet life, but one filled with deep meaning. His story became more than just a moment between a karate master and a royal guard. It became a symbol, a reminder, that even the strongest warrior still has something to learn. That true strength lies, not just in movement, but in the power to pause. People who once laughed at the video now watched it again with new eyes. They saw not a mistake, but a beginning. The moment that turned pride into wisdom. The kick that met calmness. The challenge that became friendship. And somewhere in London, far from the mountains of Japan, Thomas Harrington still stood guard. Still silent. Still strong. Still teaching the world, without saying a word.